Hi, welcome. My name is Joanna, and today I'm doing my review on the First Law trilogy. First of all, this is now my favorite trilogy that I've ever read. I absolutely loved it. I can't decide which book I loved the most, but I'll get into that. This is considered a grimdark fantasy, as many of you know, and there is so much controversy and debate over what that term actually means. Some people have positive associations with the term grimdark. They think of an author who's not afraid to take some risks and make their readers a little uncomfortable, an author who's not afraid to raise the stakes, an author who shows our common humanity, including the darker parts of our common humanity. But some may have a negative association with grimdark, calling it nihilistic, thinking of it as violent for violence sake or shock for shock value, and thinking it is gratuitous in its violence and its depictions and brutality. I know some authors distance themselves from the term grimdark because of these negative associations. I will not argue with anyone who has negative or positive associations with the term grimdark. I would consider the First Law grimdark, but I think it definitely has a light aspect to it. I won't go into too much detail with the light aspects, except to say that there is wonderful humor in Joe Abercrombie's writing style. The humor definitely lightens the tone quite a bit. The humor is so beautifully utilized through the characters. The characters in this trilogy are so distinct. They are so well realized. They feel so real. They have so much nuance to them. And the dialogue between the characters is fantastic. There are so many great moments of interaction, whether characters are in conflict or whether they are bonding with each other, whether they are having sex with each other. There are so many funny and interesting interactive moments between different characters. There are also internal thoughts that characters have that is hilarious. Expanding on the dialogue, I will go ahead and say that I personally love Joe Abercrombie's writing style. I'm not an expert on prose, but I can identify what I like in a writing style, I think. I'm starting to get there anyway. What I look for is for my eyes to feel like they can move across the page in an easy way. This is not to say that the prose needs to be very straightforward or percussive, but that it can just have a flow to it. And I feel like Abercrombie does that so well. One thing that I noticed was the way that each paragraph just feels so purposeful, and I love the way that he varies the phrase lengths. I'm a musician, so I kind of think in phrases. I like that he has like long phrases followed by short, 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 long. There's like almost a pattern to it, but just like good music, it's almost like you establish a little bit of a pattern, but then not quite, so that little bit of expectation that gets just moved off just a little bit keeps you engaged, keeps you flowing. And another thing that Abercrombie does to achieve this is he'll end a section with one word, like damn, like a character will say the word damn, and then the next section he'll start off with that same word, damn, from a different character in a different context. So you're keeping this sense of flow and transition as you're going from one section to the other, while still showing a variety of perspectives. One thing to keep in mind, if you're a fantasy reader who needs a very unique and totally different type of world or setting, if you're somebody who wants a very realized, methodical, well-detailed and explained magic system, you're not going to get that in this world. This world very much mimics our own world. I think it's somewhat based on pre-industrial revolution, but it is its own world. It's fantasy. And there is magic. It does kind of play a little bit off the trope of magic going away from the world, but kind of coming back. And while magic is an important aspect of the story, I would not say it is the focus. At least it wasn't for me when I read the trilogy. Maybe if I reread it, I'd see it differently, but I didn't see it as the big central focus, and it definitely isn't super, super explained, which I was fine with. But I know some readers have certain expectations or have certain standards of what they want their fantasy to be. For me, I like that we can have something different and it still be good, but in totally different ways. And I think that this doesn't need to change. I wouldn't change any of it. I love it just the way it is. but something to keep in mind if you are somebody who has to have magic systems like Sanderson or Brent Weeks. One note about how to read these books. I know nobody needs me to tell them how to read. I did use the audiobooks to supplement my reading of these books. I guess I used what is called the immersion technique, where I listened to the audiobooks and followed along with a physical copy. I know that not everybody likes to read that way. Most people just prefer reading with their eyes. Some people prefer only audio, but for me it worked to use both because I wanted to attend to certain details, and it's really easy for me to space out a little bit if I'm just listening to the audio and moving around. I have to say though that Stephen Pacey, the narrator for this trilogy, is amazing. Probably the best narrator I've ever heard. He brought those characters to life in the most fantastic way. Better than I probably could have even imagined the character voices. So I highly recommend the audiobooks. Even if you don't use the audiobooks throughout your read, I recommend just listening a little bit to the audiobooks just to hear a little bit of how he does the character voices, because he just deserves so much attention. Another thing about how to read these books, or what I would recommend, is a tip that I actually got from Philip Chase's channel. He did a discussion with Mark from Slowly Read, Petrick, and Mike from Mike's Book Reviews on the why you should read the First Law trilogy. It's wonderful. I'll link that discussion down below. In that discussion, they talked about how they read the books after they were published, and they discussed how it would have been a disservice to them as a reader if they had started the trilogy and had to wait a long time for the next book. I took that to heart, and I made sure that I read the trilogy within a short time period, not letting too much time go by between books. That really helped me out as a reader, and I highly recommend that to anybody who is reading this trilogy. Just make sure you don't space them out too much. That's probably a good idea for any series. I'm getting worse and worse about that lately. But overall, I'm really glad that I did that. I think you'll get more out of it if you don't wait too long between books, and you'll just appreciate it much more. At least I did. Another thing I want to say about that is that I was under the impression, I definitely have said this before, that this is more of a character-driven trilogy. I feel conflicted about that now, because after reading The Last Argument of Kings, I feel like Joe Abercrombie knew what he was doing from the beginning. There is an excellent plot in this trilogy, in my opinion. At least I see it now. I didn't see it before, and that's saying something. When you can read on in a series and the next book can make you appreciate previous books more than when you read them, I know I'm going to reread this trilogy someday and just see it with completely new eyes or a new perspective. I appreciated what he was doing so much. It was a lesson to me that I need to trust good authors to set things up and deliver things at their own pace. I think that there's so much pressure nowadays with the publishing industry and authors needing to get their foot in the door and get established, or getting their audiences to like them, that they sometimes will feel pressured to do too much in their first book in a series. I love that he didn't overdo it with that first book. I love the way he did it. I think he knew what he was doing all along. So I think that the plot is excellent in this trilogy. That might not be a popular opinion. I'm not sure. I know I've talked to a couple of people who've read this trilogy who agree with me on that. But if you first read the first book, you won't think that. You probably won't think that. And when I read the second book, I still didn't think that. I thought, oh, this is totally character driven. Now I do think that. Although I think the characters are just the best thing about the trilogy, I definitely think the plot is really good. I've changed my mind. If you've read the trilogy, please let me know if you agree or disagree about that. With that in mind, I feel like I also need to say one thing that might disappoint people who have a certain expectation for a fantasy series. A couple of people brought up a point in my comments, and I feel like this is something to consider in case this series might not be for you. You won't get typical character arcs in this trilogy the way you will with other fantasy series. For example, in the Mistborn trilogy, you get a huge character arc. I promise I won't give away any spoilers for this trilogy, but you get a huge character arc with Vin from the beginning of the Final Empire to the end of Hero of Ages. In this trilogy, you definitely get some changes and shifts with characters, but they're not like that. So if you're expecting this big, huge transformation and shift from the first book to the last book, you might be a bit disappointed. You will see some things change, and you will be surprised. I was surprised by some of the things that came out of certain characters, but it's definitely not on the level of like Mistborn or a series like that. So just keep that in mind, because I know that has disappointed some readers. It didn't disappoint me, but it might be something to consider when you're opening the series. That is all I have to say for this spoiler-free discussion on the First Law trilogy. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.